Hey everyone, Janie here. Welcome back to my garden and welcome to part 2 of my week 4 Master Gardeners training recap. So week 4, we had actually 2 topics that we learned about at my Master Gardeners training program, and I was kind of going back and forth how I was going to fit both of them in one recap video, and I decided it would just be easier to separate the 2 parts. So I do have a part 1, which is all about composting 101, composting for beginners, backyard composting, and vermicomposting. So I will link it up above right now, and then I will also link it at the end of this video so you all can watch that if you haven't watched that part of this recap yet. For part 2 is all about propagating. And when I saw propagation on the syllabus for my Master Gardeners training that day, I thought, I know propagation. I know everything about propagation. I've looked it up, I've watched videos on it, I've read books on it. I know about propagation. There's nothing that I'm gonna learn. And of course, I was completely wrong. I learned so much. I was so interested. I took tons of notes, and I wanted to share everything I learned with all of you. So our presenter for the propagation portion of the training class, his name is Jim Fowler, and he's pretty well known around here. He's a pretty well known gardener. He is a master gardener as well, and he actually is one of the propagators at our local college, UC Davis, the UC Davis Arboretum. It's a fantastic arboretum. If any of you have a chance to visit, you should absolutely go visit. But they do propagate their plants for not only for the arboretum, but also for the plant sale. They have a couple plant sales every year, and they get those plants by propagation, by cuttings. And so Jim Fowler has, I guess he started volunteering years and years and years ago, and they trained him in the ways of propagation from UC Davis. And now they actually have the students that do the propagation. So he actually was grandfathered in, but I am just honored to be able to hear what he had to teach us for propagating. So there are lots of ways to propagate plants. We all know propagation by seed, and the problem with propagation by seed is hybridization. There's a lot of big words today, so just bear with me. So when plants get pollinated by bees or butterflies or anything like that, they go from plant to plant, and they can have cross-pollination. So when you propagate a plant by seed, when you grow a plant from seed, unless you grow that plant in very secluded areas where you're only growing that particular plant, you have a chance that you can get like a brother or sister of the plant that you're trying to grow. When you propagate a plant by cutting or by division, you are guaranteed to get the same plant as the mother plant that you're propagating from. So that's great. It avoids the hybridization and it avoids the cross-pollination issue, but it also decreases genetic diversity. So if we do this too much, obviously we're putting ourselves at risk for, if a pathogen comes through and it knocks out one particular type of plant, then we're out of luck. So genetic diversity is important. Propagation by both ways is very important. But today, the demonstration that I'm going to do, this is just propagation by cutting, how to get the exact plant from the cutting that you're taking. Okay, I just have to say, if you hear a sound outside, Jason is out back and he is power washing. He is literally obsessed with power washing our entire property. It looks absolutely beautiful, but he's been working on it all day and I have a feeling you all can hear it. So if you hear it, it's Jason outside power washing. So for this Master Gardeners training recap, I thought the easiest way to get the information across was just to demonstrate it. The presenter did a demonstration in class and it was extremely helpful and very, very interesting because I had never seen some of these techniques. And now these techniques are all from UC Davis Arboretum. That doesn't mean that it is the only way to do it or it's the exact way to do it. I have read a lot of things and it did not use this technique. I just thought it was really interesting, and this is of course scientific and research-backed information that they teach us in Master Gardeners. So I think it's just interesting to know this and to see exactly how they do it. Now, it's not exact, particularly with my growth hormone, and I will get to that, but this is the best way that I can replicate it in my home. Okay, so to get started, you can see I have 2 bowls here, and this was different than I had done before. I have 1 bowl of just tap water, and then this is going to be my disinfectant, my bleach water. And what they said is they said 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. And this is going to kill any pathogens that could get in the cutting or could get on your equipment. And I have heard about disinfecting and keeping everything nice and clean, but I've actually never seen people take a bowl of bleach water and use that basically to go to that extent. But this is exactly how they do it at the UC Davis Arboretum. So I did 1 part of bleach, and now I'm going to do 9 parts of tap water. All right, so this is my disinfecting medium, and then I do have a bowl of regular clean water that I'm gonna keep. So I have my snips right here. You can use basically anything, and the idea is that you obviously want to clean it first. So you just kind of want to dip them into your bleach water, and then obviously you want to dry these off so that they don't rust, and you can spray a little bit of oil on them. I think I'm just gonna dry them off. So after you've got them in your bleach water, you wanna leave it in for about 30 seconds. And then you just wanna kind of clean them all off. All right, so now my snips are nice and clean and sterilized. And then I also wanna sterilize my skewer, my dibbler. So I'm gonna use this when I have my rooting medium. I'm gonna use this to make a hole where I put my cutting in, but you also wanna sterilize this as well. So same thing, putting it in the bleach water and then putting it in the clean water to clean it off. All right, now for the cutting. So I just went out into my garden. It is mid-January, so nothing's looking really good right now, but I did find a little bit of new growth on my Mystic Spires blue salvia. So I just took a stem, a piece of that, and the piece that I took the part where there's the new growth. This is the top, this is the apical part where the new leaves are coming out. And when you do a cutting, you want to aim for the new growth. You can take cuttings down here, but when you take cuttings down here, you have to wait for the hormone that stimulates new growth. You have to wait for the hormone to accumulate in this mid part cutting, whereas all of those hormones that stimulate growth are already concentrated up here in the apical part or the top part of your cutting. So I am going to take my cutting from this very top part of my salvia. What you want to do is you want to take off all the leaves from the lower nodes. They actually said that you don't want to rip the leaves off or scar the cambium layer, which is different for a different type of propagation. The way that I'm doing this, they say that you want to just pinch off the leaves on each of the nodes without scratching that cambium layer, the outer layer of the stem. So what you're looking for is you're looking for 1 node where the roots can come off. Now, this type of propagation, you only need 1 node. You can do 2 nodes if you want, but it's absolutely not necessary. You really only need 1. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this cutting. You can see right here, I have my leaves on top. I have a node here and I have a node here. Really, I only need this node right here. So I am gonna cut just below that node, and I'm gonna cut at a 45-degree angle, and the purpose of cutting at a 45-degree angle is to get as much moisture, to allow as much moisture uptake or water uptake into that stem. Then I'm going to actually take off these extra leaves up here, and I'm left with just these 2 little leaves. If I had bigger leaves, what you could do, I'll even do it with this one, is that you can actually cut these leaves in half. That's going to decrease the transpiration rate, or the rate that the leaves are transpiring water and making them dry out too quickly. Remember, there's no roots on this cutting, so the cutting is not getting any water from its roots. So it's only getting the water from what you're giving to it, and so if there's too much leaf material, then it's going to transpire the moisture too quickly. So you don't want too many leaves on your cutting. You also don't want any buds or flowers on your cutting. If you have buds or flowers, those are very concentrated in growth hormone, which is great, but it's also going to continue to send the energy to buds or flowers to make seeds, and we don't want that. So if you do have any flowers, just go ahead and pinch them off of your cutting. All right, so now you have your cutting. Hopefully you all can see that. Now you have your cutting, you have about one node. I actually have another node up here. So when I'm talking about nodes, nodes are the spot on the stem where the leaves come up. And we have nodes, and then we also have internodes, which is the space in between each of the nodes. And if you're gonna take a cutting, not at the very tip, not at the growth point, but a little bit further down on the plant, you're going to be left with an internode on the top of your cutting right there. And you actually don't want this. I found this to be really interesting. This is what they taught us. If you leave an internode, a really long internode right there, that cutting is not gonna start rooting and it's not gonna start propagating itself until this part, this internode, kind of decomposes, and then that rooting hormone can concentrate in the top node with the leaves. So the longer the internode that you leave on your cutting, the longer the propagation, the rooting is going to take place, is going to need, and you're opening yourself to more risk of infection or pathogens or anything like that. So if you're gonna do a middle of the stem cutting, you wanna make sure you cut down those internodes as much as possible. All right, now for what I thought was the really interesting part. I had never done this before. I have my cutting. This is from the top, the apical part, or the top part of the plant, the new growth. I have about one node. I actually have two nodes on this one, and I don't have too many leaves on there. I'm gonna take my cutting before I stick it into my rooting medium, and I'm gonna put it in my bleach water, which I found really, really interesting. I had never done this before. What that's gonna do is it's actually gonna kill all the pathogens that might infect this cutting after you've stuck it. So if you have any bacteria on there, if you have any viruses on there, if you have any mold on there, putting it in this diluted bleach water solution is going to kill all of that, and it's going to give this cutting a better chance of survival while you're waiting for it to root. So you're going to leave it in the bleach water, and then you're going to take it out and you're going to put it into the clean water to get all that bleach water off. So now you know that cutting is nice and clean. Now let's talk about rooting hormone. So like I said, in the new growth of the plant, there is a concentration of growth hormone, and that is a natural auxin. They call it an auxin that's found in plants. There are two synthetic auxins that we use for propagation, and I have to grab my notes because I can't remember them. So the growth hormone in the plant that's already naturally in there is indolacetic acid. The synthetic ones are indole 3-butyric acid and 1-naphthalene acetic acid, so IBA and NAA. So a rooting hormone or a rooting powder usually has one or both of these rooting hormones present. And what it does is it just helps the rooting or the cutting grow roots and get that growth process going. So like I said, I'm not mimicking exactly UC Davis's Arboretum propagation techniques, because apparently they have their own rooting hormone that is not available to the public, and it's kept under lock and key. Our presenter was telling us, which I just found so interesting, and I wish I knew what it was, but the ones that are available to the public are those two that I was talking about. So the presenter demonstrated a rooting powder, which only had one of the rooting hormones. I have always used Dip and Grow. I got this at my local garden center. You can get it off Amazon as well. I'll link this in my Amazon store. This one actually has both of those auxins, those synthetic hormones available. It has both the indole 3-butyric acid and the 1-naphthalene acetic acid. I know I'm saying that wrong, so I'm sorry. So I have always used Dip and Grow. I've had really good success with it. It is a liquid. It is not a powder. And what you do is you just put a little bit, like literally up to here, so it lasts forever, and then you dilute the rest with water. So here it is. This can stick up to like thousands of cuttings, right? I obviously don't need that many today, but I just made a batch just so I can show all of you. Okay, now let's talk about what type of medium you're going to use for sticking your cutting. So basically you want a medium that is sterile. You don't want to use garden soil or potting soil because it might have some bacteria that will, infect the cutting and kill it off and negate everything that we did with the bleach solution. So what I have here is I have seed starting mix, which is a sterile medium for seed starting, and it's just what I have. What they use at the Arboretum is actually half perlite and half vermiculite, which I have done that before and it works really well. The goal of your rooting medium is you want it to have the ability to contain moisture, but then you also want it to create some air pockets so that the cutting can breathe. So like I said, I've done the vermiculite and the perlite mix before. I just hate perlite. It makes me cough so bad. So it's a volcanic substance, and it's so powdery. It just makes me cough every time I use it. So be careful if you go get perlite. Vermiculite doesn't make me cough, but that is what they use at the Arboretum. All right, and now for sticking your cutting. And sticking your cutting is the term where you just put your cutting into your rooting medium. So what you want to do is you want to take your clean skewer and you just want to make a hole into your rooting medium. Now, your rooting medium, you want it to be moist, the consistency of a wrung out sponge. Like I said, this is my seed starting mix. It's already moist, it's ready to go. Then you want to take your clean cutting and dip it into your rooting hormone. I have a liquid here, but if you have a powder, you're just going to dip it in and then you're going to shake off the rest of the powder. Because I have a liquid, I actually have to leave it in here for about 5 seconds. That's what the instructions say on the Dip and Grow rooting hormone. So I just leave it in here and then I just let the rest drip off. I take my cutting and I just stick it right into my rooting medium or my seed starting mix. Pinch it in, and there we go. All right, so you're all done with your cutting. It's all ready to go. Now what? So the recommendation was to get a tray with a cover just like this. I have tons of these from seed starting. The difference is that when you have your tray, you want to poke holes. You want to poke air holes in your tray. Now, if you had something like a spinach container or a strawberry plastic container, I think those would be really, really good to use as well because they already have air holes in it. But basically you want a plastic container that's clear on the top that does have air holes. Then you're going to take your cutting and you're going to put it in and you're going to fill your tray with about 1/4 inch of water. And what that's going to do is that's going to keep the whole thing moist, allow for the evaporation onto the plastic tray, and just keep that cutting nice and moist and not allow it to dry out. What the presenter said is that once you put in about 1/4 inch of water, you can basically leave it there for about 8 to 10 days and not even pay attention to it before you need to add a little bit more water. So it's basically a completely contained environment that's going to be the best environment for your cutting to start propagating and developing those roots. Now, you can leave this whole thing outside in the shade. It's too hot. Sun is too hot for it to leave it in the sun. So you can put it in the shade, but an even better place to do it is to put it right under your grow lights. And what the presenter said is the closer that you can get to that cutting, the better. Absolutely the better. That's why he likes using these trays rather than the bigger trays, because he couldn't get the lights close enough and all of his cuttings kept stretching. So putting this whole thing with 1/4 inch of water underneath grow lights and then leaving it there for 6 weeks. So that's what he said. It usually takes about 6 weeks for a cutting on average to grow roots. So basically you can put 6 weeks from today onto your calendar, and that's when you know that your cutting is most likely going to be have developed roots, and you can pot it up into a more nutrition rich medium like potting soil or anything like that, because now it has roots and it's a little bit stronger and it can survive. So basically this whole process of propagation takes about 6 weeks. So just as a recap, the master gardener's training recommendations for propagation are taking your stem cuttings from the new growth on a plant. I have always done it, you know, all the way down the plant. I've done it on the lateral shoots and everything like that. And I get why they say take it from the tip, because the tip is where it has all the new growth hormones already concentrated, and it's going to allow that cutting to grow that much faster. Tip number 2 is to sterilize absolutely everything. Not only do you want to clean and sterilize your container, your tray, your snips, your skewer, you actually want to sterilize the cutting, which that was total news to me. I had never seen that before, and I can't wait to try out a bunch of cuttings and see how much better I do now that I'm sterilizing my cuttings in that bleach water. So I found that incredibly interesting. Tip number 3 is using the right rooting hormone. Now, they did say there are times when you don't need a rooting hormone. There's certain times of year where there's so much of that natural growth auxin there present that you don't need the rooting hormone, but the rooting hormone will just make it that much easier. And knowing which type of auxins you're looking for, these two, is really gonna help you out in the long run. Again, I really like Dip and Grow. You know, I've heard a lot of people say that this stuff is fantastic, and it has both of the synthetic hormones that you need for cuttings. Tip number 4 is the environment that you're gonna keep your cuttings in after you're done. I was always a little bit confused at this point. You know, I've seen the thing where they say, put it in a garbage bag or put it outside in the shade or anything like that. This whole solution to me makes it very, very simple. Get an enclosed space with a clear top, have air holes in it so that oxygen can get to the area, and then have it basically sit in water while it's rooting. That's gonna keep it nice and hydrated and moist. And then as that cutting starts developing roots, because it's bottom watered, because it's sitting in the water, you're gonna be able to pick up your cutting and you're gonna be able to see the roots come out the bottom. And then you know your cutting is rooted in and you can transplant it into regular potting soil or wherever you wanna put it. Somebody did ask the presenter about putting cuttings on a heat mat. And what he said is that he has tried it before. I mean, he has years and years and years of propagating experience, and they've tried a heat mat before and they really didn't see much difference. The main difference came from how close the grow lights were to the cutting. So if you have a heat mat, great, but it's not really necessary. Save that for seed germination. The main thing is have your grow lights as close as possible. I think when I do this, I'm just gonna bump it up so it can be super close to the grow lights. And then you know that cutting is going to get enough light and it's gonna photosynthesize enough so that it can start producing those roots. So I hope this was helpful for all of you. I found it fascinating to watch a master propagator do his thing. You know, I just felt like it was so interesting to see, you know, a very specific way to do cuttings and a way that definitely works. I wish I knew the Arboretum's secret rooting hormone. I wish I could find out what that was, even though I wouldn't have access to it. I would just be interested to know. But for now, I'm happy to use the over-the-counter stuff that they have for rooting hormones. So I hope this was helpful for you all. Again, not every plant is going to propagate this way. You can look up lists online, what plants are good for cuttings. Salvias are fantastic to start with. If you're starting off propagating, start off with propagating salvias because you're most likely going to be successful with that. There's other plants that you can do that you might not be as successful. And just as with seed starting, you're not going to get 100% germination rate. You're not going to get 100% rooting rate on your cuttings either. So don't expect 100%. You're not a failure. That's why you always do more than you need, so that if some of them fail, you're still doing pretty good. So in about 6 weeks, I will have a new Mystic Spires Blue Salvia all ready to go. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you all have a chance to get into your garden today.